notice of intent to issue limited tax general obligation bonds to finance a part of the cost of the city's unfunded pension liability for its defined benefit plan retirement program as authorized by Act 34, Public Acts of Michigan 2001 as amended.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support. Mayor
I
Pro
knew
Tem
you were ready, so
Archibald,
just-
supported by Councilmember Ashford. And our city manager is going to do a brief presentation on this.
As I wait for my PowerPoint to come up, I will say that I've been your city manager since June 2014, and I will wholeheartedly admit that this has been one of the most singular focuses of my administration, was getting us to this point today. And today I'm going to go over a little bit of history on how we got here, and then I'm going to give a very elevated view of our comprehensive financial plan and what it is we exactly intend to do. So first and foremost, as you all know, the budget challenges we've had over the last couple of years, there's been a reason for it, and that is called unfunded liabilities. To give you a point of reference, when I became your city manager in 2014, our annual contribution to the pension system was $3.25 million. This year, it's scheduled to be about $5.8 million. And that's just in 5 years. That's dramatic growth. It is projected to rise all the way up to almost $9 million by 2023. Now, we haven't sat idly by. One, we reduced the operational costs of government. We actually reduced the cost of government by about more than $3 million. But all those savings, the reduction in staff, the privatization, all those savings were consumed by our growing annual contributions. Our employees also sacrificed. Not only were they doing more work because they had less people to do the same tasks they were charged to do, they also took significant concessions. In our last contract agreements, they actually bridged down their pension multiplier from 2.5 to 2. That is a significant reduction in pension benefits. And on top of that, they froze the amount of overtime that can go into your final average compensation. So your final average compensations is your highest last year's averaged out. And they actually took out their overtime costs and capped it at 100 hours. So if they work 300 hours of overtime or 400 hours of overtime, they only get 100 hours factored into their pension. That's significant savings. In addition to stagnant wages and pay freezes. On top of all of that, they took additional concessions in their health care as well, paying more for co-pays and more for doctor's visits. And also point is I'm on the same system they are. So when they take health care concessions, I took health care concessions. I took Lucy to the hospital, ER, took a little tumble last week, thought it was going to be $100, it was $250. And so it is significant cost to them. But all of these things, we have these rising payments. So a couple things that have happened. First and foremost, there's assumptions in our valuations which cause this to happen. One, we have people are living longer mortality tables. People are living longer today than they ever did. Secondly, the rate of return, meaning the discount rate. We expected when I first got here, they had the rate of return, we're going to earn 8.25% on all of our investments. Then it dropped to 7.5%. Then it dropped to 7.35% in the latest valuation. Most likely it'll drop in the future as well. Then the real kicker is we used to have what's called a revolving amortization plan, a revolving payment. So you had a 30-year mortgage. So whatever your unfunded liability was, they divided by 30, that's your payment this year. They switched several years ago to what's called a stagnant amortization, about 10 years ago. And a stagnant amortization is like your home loan. You pay off the 29th year, the 28th year, the 27th year. Now we're at year 20. So we have a shorter window to pay off our unfunded liabilities, and now we have much more realistic assumptions to realize just how great our unfunded liability is. So not only did they change the assumptions on the discount rate, mortality tables, we also have now less time to pay them off. So what we needed was a couple things. One, we needed to reform our benefit system to bring down the benefits, to cauterize the growth of the unfunded liabilities. The employees today are not the problem. In fact, the hybrid system that they're on is overfunded by over 200%. The employees today are not the problem. It's the legacy costs that we can't go back and change. They're constitutionally protected. So you can't make healthcare, unlike you can make healthcare changes, you can't make changes to the pension. And so we're left with an unfunded liability that cannot be diminished in any way. So the only option we have is to find a way to manage the payments. And what we needed was a longer time to pay it off. We needed a 30-year amortization plan. So we requested to MERS, we said, hey MERS, which is our pension manager, hey MERS, instead of 20 years, can you one time just reset the clock back to 30? We've made all these changes in-house, we filed a correction action plan with Treasury, can you reset that clock just one time, just one time? They went back to the actuarials, and they have actuarial standards, and there's laws on this, and they said, no, we cannot reset that plan because you are so underfunded. We're funded today about 55% at the 7.35 rate. So they said, no, we can't do that because in the future, if you have another recession or another 2008, you could have a liquidity issue, and we don't want to risk it. That's reasonable. So then, in our most recent contract negotiations, we made all these concessions. We've capped FAC, we bridged down the pension, and I went back to MERS last month, and I said, okay, MERS, listen, the status quo has changed. We've done all these reforms. We've done all these changes. We've paid $1.5 million in, additional on top of our ARC in the last few years. Can you reset us one more time? And they said, no, you still will have a liquidity issue. We can't reset you. So for the last 3 years, I have lobbied the state, the governor, the House representatives, the Senate, and the governor. I personally met with all of them. I met with the Speaker of the House, I met with the Senate Majority Leader, testified for their committee. We went to Lansing, back and forth. It took us 2 years, really. We did the run, got brokenhearted at 11 o'clock at night, and then the second year we finally got it through the legislature and the governor signed it. We are able to bond, and the reason for that is we need to bond so that we can infuse our funds with enough liquidity to reset that amortization period and to have a longer period to pay back our unfunded liabilities. The only way we can do it is through bonding. But we didn't qualify because under state law, before it was changed, you need to have a AA bond rating. Well, because our bond rating had been downgraded for the last 15 years, we did not qualify. We have a current bond rating of A+ or A-, depending on which agency you use. So the state legislature changed that law so that we now qualify for bonding. Now here's the catch with the bonding plan. The law stated that you can only bond out for as long as your current amortization period. Well, our current amortization period is 20 years. That doesn't help us. That's essentially borrowing money and throwing it in the system to gamble. That's not what we're doing here. That does not provide us a longer timeline. We need to stratify our payments and to smooth those payments out. So Treasury took the unusual step, extraordinary step, of saying, listen, if MERS gives you a hypothetical 30-year amortization, we will accept that and allow you to bond out for 30 years. So the next slide I'm going to show you is a 30-year amortization. Here it is, reset the clock back to 30. This is what it looks like with no bonding proceeds. There's $5 million, $4 million, $5 million. It rises to $7 or $8 million in like 15 years. Honestly, we could do that. If they would just reset the clock, we could manage this payment structure. But again, the actuarial standards will not allow us to actually achieve this amortization schedule without bonding infusion. So the next payment schedule I have to show you is, here's the plan. We're going to bond out $53 million at an assumed rate of about 3.64%. Now, that rate may come in lower, it may come in higher. So in the comprehensive business plan, you actually have a sensitivity analysis based on the cost of issuance that takes us 50 basis points high and 50 basis points low. In addition to that, some may argue that 7.35% is still too high of a discount rate. I find myself agreeing with that. So you'll also see the discount rate at 7.35, which is the current valuation. You'll see it dropped 100 basis points to 6.35 and then 200 basis points to 5.35. So you actually have about 9 models in there showing the sensitivity on issuance cost and then cross-referencing that sensitivity with your discount rate and showing what your actual unfunded liability is. So we've taken into account market risk. That what if we don't get the rate of return we thought we were going to get? And what if we don't borrow at the cost we thought we were going to borrow? So $53 million at 3.64% is right around $2.9 million and change. So we'll round up to $3 million. That's the annual 30-year payment, $3 million. That allows us to irrevocably invest about $52 million into the pension funds. So once we put that money in, it leaves the city and goes into the pension funds and can never be revoked, not even in bankruptcy court, because it's no longer our asset. It is the assets of the pension fund and they're the employees who earned it. What will that look like? We will allow us to reset our clock in the comprehensive financial plan, you have an agreement with MERS. MERS says that if you invest $52 million, we will one time reset your amortization to 30 years. That agreement's in the plan as well. What will that look like? This. There will be a workout period. In fact, by state law and under Bulletin 11, you have to achieve what's called a present value of at least 15%. Treasury recognizes that it will be a workout period, so they actually let you skip the first year to calculate that rate of return. In your business plan, you will see that our present value will save the taxpayers of the city of Port Huron at least $20 million, and depending on the discount rate, those savings could go as high as $40 million. This is going to save our taxpayers. So you infuse that fund, you get a new amortization period, you skip out year two, the first year and the second year based on when we issue the bonds and the calendar date. You get into the third year. We'll say it's about $1.18 million. We're going to round up to 1.2 to keep it simple tonight. So you have a $3 million bond payment, and then you have an additional ARC payment because we're not bonding out the entire unfunded liability. State law says you can only bond up to be 80% of your unfunded liability. So you can't just take everything you owe and put it all on a 30-year note. They won't allow you to do that because they don't want to run into an issue where you're overfunded in the future if you make too much. So we will issue, so you'll have your $53 million payment at $3 million a year, and then we'll have a remaining ARC of around $28 million, depending on what rate of return you're using. They will do that on a 30-year amortization, which gives you this payment. So you have your bond payment and your remaining ARC. So $1.2 million plus $3 million, that is $4.2 million. Our payment this year, $5.8 million. That is significant savings almost immediately. Then, in the out years, this stays relatively flat, right? It goes up to about 1.4, 1.8, less than $1 million growth over 30 years. Now, I firmly believe that by the time we pay this off, I will have a plastic heart, a plastic arm, and I'm going to make it to 102. I honestly believe that the discount rate may not come to fruition. So we have to believe that assumptions are going to change in the future. But when they change, they will change to a lesser degree. Meaning if we find out that that the unfunded liability is going to be 10% more than we thought it was going to be, then they'll be able to do that in a 30-year payment. So we're in a much better position to account for future changes by mitigating the distance in which the pendulum can swing by issuing the $52 million. Now, I'm going to show you what a graph looks like. This is 5 years. This is what we've currently paid. And now going forward, the orange is what we'll be scheduled to pay if we don't bond. The gray, here's the workout period, and then here's the flat lining of what we will pay. Now, the scary question is, if we don't bond, where are we going to get an additional $3 million? We went to our taxpayers and got a public safety and parks millage. That was never a silver bullet. That never solved the problem. But it was a lifeline to get the legislation changed and to get us the ability to refinance our unfunded liabilities. Carry this out further, and it shows you just the dramatic trajectory change we have in our unfunded liabilities. That's a $3 million payment overlaid with that 30-year amortization chart. This is the difference in annual contributions. So we will put ourselves in a cash flow positive position within 36 months. We will streamline our unfunded liabilities to a much more stratified payment system that we can afford. And in time, our unfunded liabilities will begin to inflate out, become less and less and less of a burden on the taxpayers of Port Huron. This will allow us to, one, protect core public services going forward, to prevent layoffs, to prevent cuts, and to be quite frank, to avoid any type of financial crisis, which we will face in 36 months if we don't bond. So again, this is the plan. This is significant savings we'll be having, and I will take your questions. I'm sure there's a lot of them.
Okay, thank you.
But I will say this. We've worked on this 5 years now. I've been here 5 years. The reason why I believe that the state legislature took action, the reason why I believe that state treasury has taken such extraordinary measures to work with us is because they know we're not bluffing, and they know there's no alternative. We have to do this. And so my professional opinion is that if we don't bond and we don't infuse our systems with $52 million, our pension system is a great risk of diminishment or collapse within 36 months.
Okay.
Mayor Rapp?
Yes,
I'll
let's
start.
Go right ahead.
Just two quick things. One, I want to clarify that they have guaranteed that it'll be a one-time reset and we will go get the 30 years.
Correct.
Just in case somebody missed that.
Correct.
But I'd also like to know, and I I don't think I missed it, but anyway, is there anything put in place that future administrations can't come in and raise multipliers or do something that will affect us in the future? So there's many people who may believe that raising the multipliers the last time got us into trouble, probably shouldn't have been done. Well, I'm not going to get into all of that, but is there something in place to make sure that doesn't happen again? So after we bond this out and we put all this money in, 20 years from now, we're not in the same position because somebody did it again.
Correct. Per the act, once we issue bonds, the systems we have now can never be reopened or augmented. That doesn't mean in the future you can't create a new system, but that would be financially unwise. But you cannot reopen these systems in any way, correct?
So financially unwise does not prevent someone from creating a new one.
Under this system, you have to close them all, and no employee can go, any employee in the current system cannot go into a new system or create a new system and transfer them over. You have to close these systems, you cannot reopen them, you cannot alter them per the act. But we cannot tie the hands of future councils per state constitution.
So any new system would be for new employees only?
Correct.
Thank you.
You bring up another good point. We are working with our collective bargaining groups right now. One of the key issues here is that we must close all our pension systems to new hires and deploy a deferred compensation or a DC plan, defined compensation, what the private sector has a 401k system or a 4057 system. And now that will be a challenge. There are legitimate issues in a talent shortage when you're competing for workers around the state. Not offering a pension is not as lucrative. However, I'm confident that we're going to work with our collective bargaining groups to deploy a very competitive DC plan that if done right, will perform or outperform a pension system going forward. And it also offers our employees portability and freedom of choice.
Questions? Start down. You look like you want to ask a question, Councilmember Harris.
Yes. You know, James made some interesting things here, and I've spent the last couple of days recuperating and talking with people from MERS and Plant Moran and some other things, and you know, I don't think that we have to be afraid of if we have to lay off someday or something. I don't think that all the projections that you're making, that it's not a position. I think we're going to go through one of those times where things are going to be flat. But I don't think it's going to lead to a financial struggle beyond the bond issue.
Can you clarify what do you mean by that?
I'm just saying, you know, the way the economy is, over a 30-year period, we're bound to find a period of 4 or 5 years where basically we don't meet our bond revenues and our payment sources and stuff like that. But I'm trying to think that under this plan, we will be able to. What do you think would take to correct a abnormal situation?
Yeah, Councilman Harris, you bring up an excellent point. And what Councilman Harris is saying is that essentially, you know, we're going to borrow an issuance cost at 3.64%. We're hoping to get a rate of return about 7.35 to 6.35. Some years we won't get that. We won't achieve that. Naturally, the economy will have recessions. We're probably going to approach recession very quickly. Naturally, you'll have times of retraction. In 2008, MERS, our pension fund, lost 25%. Over 10 years, though, we got it all back. The reason for doing a 30-year amortization schedule is it provides a longer horizon to achieve your expectations and assumptions. It provides a longer opportunity to make that 7.35, to make that 6.35. What's great about the time we're borrowing now is the stars are kind of aligning for us because we're not in peak market conditions right now. There is talk of recession. When there's talk of recession, the market goes towards security, and the security is municipal bond. When we began looking at this when I first started writing the comprehensive business plan in May and June, I was using an issuance cost number of 4.75, which is a payment of 3.4 million. So just in the last few months, the municipal market has gotten so strong that now interest rates are down to 3.5, 3.64 when you factor in all the actuarial cost. We just did a sewer refinancing at 2.58, extraordinary low interest. So we couldn't find a better time to be issuing bonds and get a cheaper rate of issuance cost. 3.64 is an incredible rate.
Yeah, and I'll just finish my comment on, you know, we talk about our recruiting efforts and how we're going to have enough money to pay employees and stuff like that. I think the biggest selling point with the city of Port Huron right now is that I think some of our police officers and firemen will want to come to Port Huron rather than Pontiac, Hamtramck, and Detroit. So I think we have a little financial advantage there in getting there.
I agree. I think one of the biggest concerns I have as the city manager is I think the biggest deterrent to talent attraction is uncertainty. Meaning we're having a very honest conversation here today. If I was a young employee looking at where I'm going to build my career, until this issue is resolved, I'm not sure I would select the city of Port Huron. Because the city manager is saying that in 36 months, if we don't get this, our house in order, we're going to have serious financial issues. That's a difficult conversation for me to have. It's not politically expedient, but I have a fiduciary obligation to not only to the mayor and the council, but I have a fiduciary obligations to the staff and the employees of the city of Port Huron to be honest with them. And I told them in our town hall, there's a lot of people who will paint you a rosy picture and lie to you. But at the end of the day, the people who have the most to lose on inaction or indifference to this challenge is the hardworking men and women of the city of Port Huron. They are the ones who will bear the burden of inaction and indecision. Not us. I've been here 5 years. I'm that much into the system. I'll be fine.
Other questions?
James, are these bonds pension obligated?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in your notes to us, you mentioned that there is a risk factor.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think Councilman Harris brought up, Councilman Warden has mentioned it numerous times, and I think it's absolutely fair, is we could borrow $53 million, put it into the system tomorrow, and have a recession where we lose 7 to 10%. That is, in fact, not only is that could happen, but I would imagine we will lose between 5 and 7% in the next 36 months to 4 years. However, in a longer horizon, we will earn that back, just like we did in the 2008 losses. And over time, we shall come out in a much better position. Also, in that time, if they change the assumptions or our evaluations, we now are in better positions to cope with those changes and mitigate them to a smaller and smaller swinging area.
So that's your countermeasure to suffice for the risk.
Correct.
That may be, okay.
Correct. In fact, MERS, if you look at in our actuarial report there and in the comprehensive plan, I actually gave you, I believe, the last 5 and 10 years of market performance for MERS. So I gave you actually what the pension fund did, and then I actually gave you what the market rate was. So you have the market rate and the actuarial rate. The reason for that is a pension system is a little bit more conservative than the market, because when you're dealing with people's livelihoods, you're not doing risky financial transactions, you're not in a very aggressive portfolio, and you're conservative. So they're not making as much, but they're definitely not losing as much as well.
I needed that, okay. Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Mayor Rep,
Councilmember Warden?
well, first I just got to say a lot of compliments to City Manager Freed and the staff and administration. It's been well over 3.5, 4 years. He came into town. When he did, he dug in and saw this looming thing, and this has been first and foremost in his everyday life. And it's a lot of accomplishments that you've achieved, informing not only the citizens but also the employees and staff, and hey, what are we really running into? So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank, of course, Ed Brennan. When you guys are putting this stuff together, I mean, it's really complex. And you guys put an awful lot of work together in this. And of course, there's other people involved, I'm sure, to try to be able to get this whole thing, figure out what needs to be done, how to if they say no, or hey, we need something else, how do you get MERS to what can be done? So I applaud that effort. The stuff that I shared, what I want to say from the beginning when we started talking about this in the budget, and then, kind of after follow-up there, is really trying to just to make sure and share, to do anything I can when something like this, I know it's a major, you shared an awful lot, but also my own understanding as I've been listening to every word, reading every single thing. The goal was to make sure that we really put it out there, and I shared a bunch of examples and articles and things of other cities, and that really was to just make sure when we're evaluating this that we're taking that into consideration, because nothing's guaranteed in the future, but there also history repeats itself. The market is the market, and the economy definitely has swings. There's just no way, because it always overreacts to the positive, and then it also digests when times are slowing down. So I did want to just make sure I said that the main thing I had here is, from my standpoint, and again, each council member has different, involvement or what they would like, and I tried my best not to request or try to nag or try to figure out how to get information. I wanted to put it out there at council meetings in I think it was March, or was it May maybe? Let's see. Back in the meeting. And my suggestion and question, as I said it amongst here, is I was really looking forward to see, just as you're evaluating and doing due diligence, what may be, because the 52 million or 53 million, we know we talked in the initial budget talk, that's kind of like the cap that the city as a whole might be able to get up to, and at least that was back in the time frame. And I thought, there might just be, if we look at it, is there a different potential amount? What would it look like? What would the scenario look like if it was 10 or 15 or 20 or 25, or maybe it's 50 million or 44? These type of scenarios is what I was kind of looking for, just to be involved, to be able to give. I know you always ask for any other viable option or any other suggestions. Well, in mine, look, I was requesting that information so I could try to help and give that feedback. And, I know, I think I just have some notes here I just want to share. I'm, as of May, requesting that in council meeting in this forum, and then again in July, followed up and said, hey, we haven't received anything other than the first spreadsheet and stuff. And I thought, wow, you guys put the work in, all the spreadsheet for 52 million. I had to assume that you probably, even prior to that or throughout, maybe have, even came up with what would some other numbers be. What if it's only 30 million or 40 million? And I kind of wanted to see that product. That's what I was requesting. And for whatever reason, I'm still here today, and just as a council member, I've not received any of that, other options that I tried to request. So I just wanted to give feedback on
Can I address that before we go on, because I don't want to get too far in. So first and foremost, our debt limit is not 53 million. Our debt limit under state statute is 61 million and change. So the 53 million, so the reason why you don't receive proposals that show you 40 million and 30 million and 20 million, at one point you proposed $10 million increments, is because in the agreement, as we noted before, there is an agreement with MERS on the one-time extension. The $53 million is not only based on what our debt capability is, because we didn't want to max out the credit card. Because what if there's an issue? What if the city hall burns down? What if a tornado hits the city? What if we need to issue emergency bonds? Whatever the reason is. The $53 million was negotiated with MERS and the actuarial scientists and the actuarial standards on what will it take to reset the clock back to 30 years. So if we reduce below $53 million to any lower increment, we will, one, not reach close to the 80% threshold that is required under Bulletin 11 by State Treasury, but it's highly unlikely that the actuarial scientists will allow us to reset that clock to 30 years. In fact, I was point blank told by the actuarials, you need to dump in at least $50 million if you're going to get this thing reset to 30 years. So the reason why you don't have different models is because it doesn't achieve the goal of a longer horizon to pay off our unfunded liabilities. It doesn't solve the problem. So you would have issued bonds and achieved nothing.
Yeah, again, coming from just a perspective of city taxpayer money, what we're going to borrow, the viewpoint is what are the limits, what can we do, and then also to again, potentially save a little powder if we need to 3-4 years down the road. Is there potential for another bonding or something else comes up, legislative action changes, and they're going to be monitoring this to see how successful, and again,
one of the things is
sometimes they don't move as fast as you want to.
One of the things I want to bring up is
so,
when you pass out the articles for all the stories across this country where bonding maybe didn't work, you're not the only one who saw those. State Treasury took note of that. State Legislature took note of that. When I was negotiating with the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader and the Governor and the State Treasurer, we specifically talked about what happened in those scenarios. That's why you actually have a corrective action plan, this comprehensive financial plan. So we filed the corrective action plan with Treasury, and now we filed a comprehensive plan because other communities didn't close their systems. So they bonded out and continued racking up unfunded liabilities. They didn't have the political will or the moral will to lead on doing what was right and reducing the pension benefit and capping FAC. They essentially just went out and issued bonds. They did no sensitivity analysis. They did no market analysis. They did no modular on the 9 different scenarios. And so, one, they continued issuing. It's like refinancing your credit card but keeping your credit card open and keep swiping. That's what they did. And that's cowardness. And so I look at what those systems done, and those were lessons learned from all across the country. So when we wrote that legislation, and when Treasury issued Bulletin 11, all those issues where other communities have failed were factored into that. So this is probably one of the best bonding packages and best business plan you'll see, I would argue, anywhere else in the country.
I appreciate that. And again, when I was handing that stuff out, pulling that up, it's really for me to give at a council meeting to other council members, whether we had it before or not, if you knew about it, we're the ones, the more that we could be educated on this stuff so we can have a good view, ask good questions, and make sure that we're trying to come up with the best possible scenario and know the risks of what it's going to take. The other thing, you mentioned it here, again, the 7.35%, and again, that's just the actuarial. The good news is that that's what they're using as an assumption, and that's what they're telling us, hey, this is what you should use. And when we have those type of potential payments, assuming that return, we actually have the choice to go over and above that. And that's the key that I want to make sure that as this council and to the current administration, and Councilmember Archibald said, hey, is there something that for future we can't let somebody wreck this ship when it's halfway in. But that's the real key too, because we have OPEB unfunded liability, we have other expenses, we're going to have to deal with this, and to be able to commit potentially more toward, even more than that required amount, is something that I would want us to do the budget, figure it out, and then see if there's any way to even be a little more proactive with a plan, which hopefully you're on board with as well.
Wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on maybe the 7.35 is a little bit too aggressive. I think you and I have common ground there.
We get it.
I think that's one of the reasons why we issued in 15, 16, and 18 the additional $500,000 payment above and beyond our ARC. So what you're saying is what we've already been doing. We've put in $500,000 3 years, almost 3 years in a row, except for that 1 year where it got tight, we had to skip. But going forward, I think that is a critical question that we should have at budget time, saying, should we adopt, because really the difference in the current amortization versus the 7.35 and 6.35, we can do both. And so that's an honest conversation that we should have at the goal setting session. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. And again, just with what we have to submit in, what we have to get to try to get approved, what we have to put out there, and then also take that extra step, just because in the past the payments are there. We need to make sure we, try to, because I don't know that you're not really allowed to, and with the interest rate so low that potentially you're not really going to be wanting to refinance or pay them off early if we can get them at 3.5% or 4%. The bondholders, once they give it to us, that's what we're paying them back at for that period. So really, that part of the factor is very important, and it's a positive, a lot of positives. I want to thank also, again, the police, fire, the unions, everybody that actually, over the years, did step up, did negotiate, and did lower their factors, and cap and FAC. This thing is just a massive, massive burden that we've been undertaking and aggressively trying to figure out solutions. So, the only other thing that we have to do is, again, just, you kind of made it clear here, and again, MERS, we have to count on MERS, that's part of it. Once we borrow the $52 million, just like you mentioned, it has to go right to them. They they buy into whatever investment allocation they have, and we're going to have to hope that they, have a way to mitigate losses and kind of offset the, in case there is a major downturn. I don't think they can go to just straight cash, but and I don't know if there's one more thing here. Yeah, and again, I think you mentioned it. Just going forward in the public and that as well, I really hope that we, as we get excited, as we think about the potential for having a higher interest rate and maybe actually making, over a period of time, maybe it does perform and outperform what we're doing. I think at this point we have to really take a stance to say, hey, we need to have it at what if, and even if at the 5.5% or 5.35%, what would that look like? And say, look, this is reality. If we do better, we do better, but we need to, and that's what I'd like to see put out and informed to the public going forward if you're going forward with this thing.
Yep, and that you'll
Thank you.
see, so you will see I have given you the 30-year amortization at 6.35, and I've given you the 30-year amortization at 5.35. So again, that's the 100, 200 basis point reduction That's required by Bulletin 11. So in this plan, the citizens can download it tonight, and any employee can download it tonight and have that exact same amortization
Yeah.
schedule.
No, thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Ashford.
And that all includes the market value that we were having that big to-do a few years ago, a few months ago, whatever. I just wanted to mention that. And I too would like to thank you and the staff, because I know it wasn't a one-man show
was
behind
not.
you, but that is one thing that you are good at. You're good at your finances.
The one thing.
And well, I mean,
There's consensus in that.
well, I mean, that's another thing that, oh, I done it
All
now, okay. And then our financial staff and everything, and you guys you do a wonderful job. But what I'd like to make clear up here is that we don't have a choice, there's no option what is before us tonight. This is something that we have to do to survive as a city. And actually, what James has done, him and his staff, is that you don't get this, but we get the packet up here, and these yellow flippy notes, he went back as far as 3 years ago with data that he wanted to match to make sure he's seeing what he's seeing is true. And so I found myself matching that data with his presentation that he's making tonight. And then also, he positioned us and reaching out for this information, the outlook on our credit, you know, when you want to buy something, you want to get something, you know, everybody want to know, are you reputable, you know, and so if you want to know how reputable you are as a city, just bear with me, it's only 3 lines. The stable outlook reflects our view of Port Huron's very strong budget flexibility and liquidity, yeah. We do not anticipate changing the ratings within the 2 years outlook horizon, as we expect the city will maintain its strong, and I repeat, strong budgetary performance and management conditions, but view any significant strengthening of the economy score is unlikely. Additionally, any weakening in the debt and contingent liability profile could pressure the rating. But we're looking good, and we are good, and he has positioned us, you know, in a different way that we can't afford to do what we're doing up here tonight. So that takes in all the employees that did the freezing of the pay raises or whatever, the millage that we did. So we're all in this together, and we have to continue to move ahead like that and move forward together. So it's not just about your city manager, but it's about what you can do out there as the people of Port Huron. And Dave Haynes, you in this too, or everybody. So I just want to make that clear that this is a real huge move for us. I know we had to come up with our corrective action plan. We had to do all this, so this is part of a bigger picture. But this right here is really the apex of it all. And the last thing I would like to ask James is that I know a lot of cities found themselves in this too. Did you see any other cities? I mean, I know some have bonded when they took the same route that we are taking tonight.
So I'm very close with city managers from across the state. We talk on a daily basis. There has been, we talk the most about unfunded liabilities, and we talk the first. But that's because a lot of other communities didn't have the political will and the moral courage all of you did to address the issue.
Right.
And now we're seeing that inaction and indecision is a decision. And other communities are finding themselves in a very terrible situation that they should have acted sooner. I am very concerned about some municipalities across the state of Michigan who haven't led, who haven't addressed this issue. And I will believe that in the next 5 years, this will be one of the singular most important issues facing government and state government as a whole.
Right.
And they're watching us closely.
And they are, and we're definitely a model in that leadership effort in moving, having everybody else look at us and see what we're doing. But the only thing that I talked to another municipality, they said that we didn't have the courage and the backbone that you guys did going along, you know, the route. So it's something you just can't come in and say, we're going to do it right at this point. You have to have that prelude of faith moving forward. So thank you, James. Thank you, City, and thank you, City of Port Huron employees. Thank you.
Question. What is now the timetable for the rest of, as everything's going to progress from here?
So Treasury has given me permission. We weren't sure if we were allowed to move this process forward while simultaneously negotiating with our collective bargaining groups. Because the timeline is sensitive, Treasury has given me permission that, yes, you can move forward with your notice of intent and move forward with your comprehensive business plan, because there's statutory timelines and everything. We'll have to issue certifications, publishing dates. I want to get this done before January. I want to get our collective bargaining agreements negotiated. There's a lot of things to talk about. And I want to work with our collective bargaining groups, and I want to get this done in a very timely fashion, and I want to be in market by January.
Cool. So what's the next thing we will expect to see? from City
So you'll do your
Council?
notice of intent, you'll do your comprehensive business plan tonight, we'll begin the statutory clock rolling on that, and then in 45 days, I'll bring you additional resolutions. Before I go down, I just want to just do a little recap here. When I got here in 2014 and began assessing the situation, I brought my first budget to you, and there was a headline in the Times-Herald that says, "City Manager wants to cut $1 million." I still have that headline in my office. I have it folded. And I just want to say this. I never wanted to be the city manager that woke up and cut $1 million and proposed to you cuts. And I know you never want to be the mayor and council who had to vote on those cuts. It is the most difficult decision. I call it the burden of leadership. There's nothing more sickening and heartbreaking than getting on the elevator, passing employees in the office, knowing that them and their families are worried if they're going to have a job on July 1st. I can only imagine the anxiety, the worry of, am I going to have a job? And it breaks my heart that our employees had to go through that. It is, I know I put on a good smile, and I try being a good face, and that I'm a strong leader, but this was a very challenging 5 years for my wife and I and my family to have to lead in this process. But I knew that these difficult decisions, like all of you knew, this was the moral test, the great question of our time. Do we have the moral and political will to lead on these issues? When I was holding my employee town hall, I had a police officer who's going to retire in 7 years. And he said, "James, just a simple question. I'm going to retire in 7 years. Is my pension going to be there for me?" And again, that statement to me just wanted to make me cry. How sick. A guy who's dedicated his entire life to protecting the citizens of this community has to have that question. As the city manager of Port Huron, I refuse to let that question linger any longer. We have to take action on this. And I also believe that this is a calculated business decision here. I've looked at this decision. I've traveled the entire state, finding people who are smarter than I am, which is hard to do, to give me their opinion. And I just got that one in. But no one can bring me a more viable alternative. And so this is what I believe is going to happen. I firmly believe that the economic conditions in Port Huron, private enterprise is leading. We have $300 million of investment in this community. We have more than 2,000 new jobs. Port Huron is booming. We're going to get this fixed. Our employees are going to have that security that they deserve. They're going to have that surety knowing that their system's going to be there for them, and that the citizens of this community are going to know that we have a cash flow positive future. Your local services, your quality parks and recreation, your extraordinary police and fire, the gorgeous McMorran, those are going to be protected. Those are going to be here for this community. This is not doom and gloom. I know we're going to get this done. I have no doubt we're going to get this done, and we're going to take this community to prosperity. I've said this time and time again. My daughter, Jeff's kids, and your kids will never get to decide. They don't get the luxury to decide on what kind of community they're going to grow up in. We make those decisions today. And I believe that we're going to put them in a very prosperous position, in a cash flow positive position that allows my daughter and your kids and the children of this community to build the future for their kids that they desire. And we're going to free them from the unyielding burden of unfunded liabilities. It needs to finally be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody's had the opportunity, so I will just add to that I thank you for all your hard work and the staff, and I know you've had spent many, many hours working on this. So thank you very much. We will take the vote.
Councilmember Warden,
No.
Councilmember Archibald,
Yes.
Councilmember Ashford,
Yes.
Councilmember Beeden,
Yes.
Councilmember Harris,
Yes?
Councilmember Pemberton,
Yes.
Mayor Rapp.
Yes. We'll move on to